You give a man a fish, he eats for a day. You teach a man a fish, he eats for life. I'm the type of educator that I'm going to teach somebody how to build their own protocol because it should be bio-individualized based on the labs, based on the symptoms, based on the budget, based on the psychological preferences of the client. That's what it means to be a really good coach, is
Mm.
individualizing the experience to that particular individual. So teaching all the different tools of, well, how do we build a sophisticated mold protocol based on the labs? The lab section is definitely my favorite though, because I think trying to navigate mold illness is really, really tricky in knowing which labs and which biomarkers and how to correlate the findings, how to look at, an environmental inspection or a ERMI test or dust test or something that's inspecting the environment, during being able to draw parallels to the physiological testing, the blood work, the organic acids, mycotoxins, all the things. So I think if people go through the program, they'll see what I mean. It's very dense, and people should walk away with a very full toolbox. And then it takes time and practice, obviously, of learning how to use those tools. Well, bust them out, use them, put them into practice, and you'll get better at using those tools as you go.
Awesome. And yes, we do have Nicole Kruger with us. She won't be on camera or audio, guys, but you will see her in the chat. She can probably drop some links for us here if you guys are interested in that. And now I'm going to finally get to some audience questions here. Thanks for your guys' patience. Um, Patty, we'll start with you. You were the first one. Patty said, "Do we need a binder when killing off mold?" Obviously, everyone's case is different. I think, Brendan, you kind of just had a perfect segue to this, right? Because it's like, yes, the labs matter, the person matters. Does this person actually have mold illness? So humor me here. Let's just say, generally speaking, are most mold protocols going to include a binder?
Yeah, generally speaking, yes. And what I like though about the binder conversation, I put a post up on Instagram maybe like 2, 3 years ago that was like, binders are the new multivitamins, and I was just kind of having fun because I do though. I think with the toxic burden that we're all being exposed to, whether it's the nanoplastics or glyphosate or bisphenols and mycotoxins and metals, all the things. I do think binders are a good thing for most people to be incorporating into their kind of day-to-day supplemental regimen. But the nice thing too, though, is I think with binders, I think we've gotten a little bit kind of siloed and dogmatic of, we're thinking about charcoal and zeolite and humic fulvic acid and kind of these more traditional adsorbent binders, but probiotics could be binders too. So I teach that in the program. If there's a lot of different probiotic strains that can help bind and neutralize mycotoxins and fight off fungus in the gut, or things like serum bovine immunoglobulins or colostrum, or even just dietary fibers. So absolutely to binders, but there's actually a lot of different types of kind of binding and neutralizing substances that we can be using to get more broad binding capacity depending on what the toxic exposure is.
Awesome. I think this is just a comment, but I'd still like to read these. Again, I love these sessions because we just have the time to kind of get through everything. Current FDN trainee just finished module 6. Nice. Started off with Holistic Health Week. Okay, I do remember you too. So very nice job. You're moving right along. I had mold exposure a few years ago. I signed up for the last one, but I'm focusing on the course and will watch as I can fit it in. All right, cool. So just a comment, but fantastic. Jason, what is the best test or blood work to do to see if possible mold toxicity in the brain? So I don't know if it would be different for a specific organ in your body, but maybe we kind of touch on two questions here because this did come up as well. Like, what is the preferred testing method for mold in general? And would there be some specific way to look at it in the brain? I certainly wouldn't be aware of that if that's the case.
Yeah, so a really fun question for me. Nicole knows this because I did go into this in the course a little bit, and I'm really proud of how I built the lab testing section because it starts with the environmental, right? Because obviously, like, well, if we have, let's say, mold toxins coming out in the urine at high quantities, the very first question is, where are those coming from, right? But the problem is most people are, I think, overly reliant on urinary mycotoxin testing, and candidly, the quantity of mycotoxin excretion tells me really nothing about the person's physiology, right? Now, if they have a high degree of excretion, okay, yeah, where is that coming from? Are they currently being exposed? Is it ingestion? Is it inhalation? Is it a transdermal absorption? Is it an environmental exposure? Is it dietary exposure? Is it all of the above? Is it that well, this is a previous exposure, but now because they're catabolic losing weight and pushing the detox harder, it's being excreted and it's been stored in their body for a long time, right? It almost kind of creates more questions than answers, which is why we have to use a lot of other lab testing and parameters to sort of qualify and objectify, well, what does the excretion mean? So somebody was asking about, well, what's the best mold test? What's the best mycotoxin test? I heard blood is better. And even with mycotoxin testing, and I teach all the options because I'm just here to fill clinical toolboxes as full as possible. So there are the urinary mycotoxin tests, and those are kind of the most common, but there are blood antibody mycotoxin tests as well. So instead of the technology is different, I know the owner of that lab, where instead of looking at mycotoxin excretion in the urine, they're looking at immunoglobulins towards the mycotoxins in the blood. So more so, is your adaptive immune system responding to an exposure? And is that more historical? Is it more acute, depending on, is it IgM, IgG, IgA, IgE? Is it more of a mold allergy? Now, there's kind of pros and cons to all the tests, right? So the argument with the antibody testing would be, well, mold and mycotoxins can be immunosuppressive, which could potentially decrease the antibody production towards the mycotoxins, right? Now, in a world where like budget didn't matter, if you had like a really rich client, okay, then great, you can run all of the tests and get more clarity, because every test is going to give you a handful of puzzle pieces, but sometimes these complex cases can be like 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. So if each test is providing 50 or 100 pieces and you run 5 of them, right? So it's just about trying to compile as many puzzle pieces, but ultimately the lab testing isn't a replacement for clinical critical thinking, and I say that a million times in the course. But so there's this whole art to it, and this is where, as far as the brain aspect, I touch on it briefly in the course because I created my own lab test and lab panel based on the work that I was doing around sort of this mold brain, right? That's kind of why I was really fascinated by mold, is when it comes to root causes of mental, neurological disturbances, I don't know that it gets worse than mold. Even somebody that is acutely, briefly, I don't know, staying in a moldy Airbnb, they can have a lot of brain fog and weird symptoms immediately, acutely, even if it doesn't really disturb their physiology for years to come. But it's just so neurologically toxic. Mycotoxins are very damaging to our liver, our kidneys, our gut, our cardiovascular tissues, but especially the brain is very, very sensitive to the noxious effects of mycotoxins. So that's where the mental map, which you read in my bio, that's where that came from, is I was really deep in the mold world, and I was basically trying to figure out, well, what biomarkers can I use to get more objective clarity on how is the mold affecting them, or other things that are driving neuroinflammation and oxidative stress and leaky brain and neural perturbations. So I did a ton of research trying to figure out what the best biomarkers are. And especially the final point to wrap this up is being able to have biomarkers that you can track over the course of time, and you're seeing them getting better in correlation with symptoms. Like, some lab tests are not great for that. Urinary mycotoxin testing is a great example of that. Of the urinary excretion doesn't really correlate with symptoms very well. And we can't rely on tracking symptoms because symptoms can be up and down and all over the place, partially influenced by the person's psychology and their perceptions, right? Even if they're just getting a little stressed out or worried, they might get a little bit of a perks flare going on. So I really wanted to figure out what biomarkers we can track to see over the course of time, is the neuroinflammation getting better? Is the bodily inflammation or the GI inflammation? Or, if we know from research that mycotoxins are so poisonous for the liver and the gut and the kidneys and the brain, shouldn't we be utilizing biomarkers that are reflective of how well those organs and tissues are functioning, right? Because it's one thing to have a ton of toxins coming out, but are those toxins actually harming the different physiological pathways or tissues? We don't have to guess. We can measure these things and then see if we're getting better as we're using our dress protocols.
That's awesome. Thank you. Great answer. All right, and that covers actually a few of these. All right. And guys, I promise I see some people in the literal Q&A. We're going to get there as well. Obviously, a lot more of you on than our first session. So if you are just tuning in, welcome. We have one more session for you guys today. Summer Open House is an awesome mix of clinical and business, because a lot of us need to end up getting in business for ourselves if we actually want to go do this as work.